Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. The Ministry of External Affairs on Wednesday slammed the Nepal government's approval of a new Nepalese map that shows territories contested with India as a part of Nepal. Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli on Wednesday asserted that Lipulekh, Kalapani and Limpiyadhura belong to Nepal and vowed to reclaim them from India through political and diplomatic efforts, as his cabinet endorsed a new political map showing the three areas as Nepalese territory. India called the move a unilateral act which is not based on historical facts and evidence. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the India-Nepal map RAW. Joining me on the program today are Rakesh Sood, former ambassador, Pant, Head Strategic Studies Observer Research Foundation, and Major General Dhruv Katoch, retired Director, India Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. Let's first analyze the latest flashpoint between India and Nepal.
Well, first of all, it is the issue has been there for a number of years. We've been talking about it since the 1990s at least. And because the boundary between India and Nepal was the boundary that we inherited in 1947 which was the boundary between British India and Nepal that had been fixed by the Treaty of Sugauli. And that basically said River Kali River constitutes the boundary, and east of Kali is Nepalese territory. So essentially the dispute arises as to which is the point of Kali River. And I think what has happened is that over a period of time, there have been two divergent interpretations. One, whether Kali comes from Kalapani, which is through if we go up to Garbeang, you will find in a map, if your audience could see the map, you would find that from Garbeang along the Kailash Mansarovar road, along the boundary between India and Nepal, there is a point that goes to the east towards Kalapani. And that is, the British took that as the origin of Kali River. Nepal, even at that time, had said that the origin is actually at Limpiyadhura. Limpiyadhura goes to the west from Garbeang village. And we've been talking about this for the last, we had a joint technical committee of the boundary that resolved about 90% of the boundary between India and Nepal. But this was one small part that required additional work. That it was decided at the level of the Prime Ministers way back in 2000 that this would be addressed by the foreign secretaries. It has not happened. And so that's where the origin of the problem lies. Nepal took it up even in 2015 when Prime Minister Modi had gone to China. And in our joint statement with China, at that time we talked of Lipulekh Pass as one of the areas for boundary trade. Nepal had, this was in 2015, I think it was the month of May. Nepal then protested. It sent us and China both a note saying that, look, this is something which is subject to discussion between India and Nepal, and so therefore this needs to be resolved. So it's not as if this is the first time that the subject has come. More recently, it had come up in November of last year, when after the reorganization of the state of Jammu and Kashmir into union territories, we issued revised maps. And at that stage, again, Nepal had taken it up with us, saying that, look, we need to have talks at the foreign secretary level because your maps show the inclusion of Kalapani. And somehow or the other, we've not had these talks. And then the other thing is that we've been building this road. Now, this road has not been built overnight. This road project was started in 2008, in fact, when I was posted in Nepal. It has taken us nearly 12 years to build this road. And throughout this period, the government of Nepal has been fully aware of the fact that the road is being built. The other thing is that after all, we have an open border and free movement of people across the border between India and Nepal, which is a very rare thing. So people don't really care too much about the actual border because they know they can move across. However, for security reasons, it is quite necessary that we know where the boundary is, we know where the border is. And from that point of view, Lipulekh Pass has been under the government of India's control since the 1950s. And even China sees it as that, because the first time in the India-China border trade agreement that was done in 1953, we find a mention of Lipulekh Pass between India and China's talks. So in a sense, it is seen that this part belongs to or comes under Indian, belongs to Indian territory. However, there has always been this discussion between Nepal and India, which unfortunately has not been satisfactorily resolved and has now come into this rather messy situation with Nepal issuing new maps. The previous, incidentally, the previous Nepal maps before the new ones, while they included the 62 square kilometers of Kalapani, they did not include the 335 square kilometers going westwards towards Limpiyadhura. That is the first time that you actually have a Nepali map including that territory. So there are two separate issues, and I think Nepal has upped the ante in a sense.
Okay, so talking about upping the ante, I'm going to come to the strategic aspect of all these three areas in just a bit. General, I'd like to take that up with you. But talking about upping the ante, Professor, what has caused this really? Why has Nepal upped the ante at this juncture?
Well, I think it's quite extraordinary if you see some of the things that the Nepalese leadership at this point seem to be doing. Not only ratcheting up this issue to a level where perhaps it does not belong if you look at the kind of relationship that India and Nepal share, but also in terms of some of the diplomatic niceties that need to be followed. I mean, if you look at the statement that has just come out, that has recently come out from Prime Minister himself, talking of India virus being stronger than Chinese virus, etc. I mean, they just, it looks quite, in simple words, it does not behove a prime minister to speak like that, especially when you know that this is a historical problem where both sides have tried to address it as the ambassador was articulated, for a long time. Have been trying to articulate it for a long time. My own sense is that a lot of it is for the domestic audience. A lot of it is about Mr. Oli himself and how his domestic situation, how his domestic popularity has veered from one end to the other. Now, if you recall, during the so-called blockade of 2015, his popularity soared. And he used that to his advantage domestically by standing up to India and harnessing his nationalistic credentials, if you will. And I think to a certain extent, the upping of the ante at this point also alludes to that. I mean, he's at this point, he was not very good. He was facing some domestic problems. And you see suddenly now, once he would have made these statements and he would have projected, oh no, we want to take it back by one means or the other, trying to ratchet rhetoric, you would see that his popularity would also rise. So a lot of it has to do with the domestic audience. A lot of it has to do with how he projects himself. And of course, there is the perennial China question. One may not agree that China is at the back of it, but you have to look at it in the context of a number of things that are also happening at the border. And one has to acknowledge that if at all it is being done in coordination with certain actors. And I think our Indian Army chief also pointed that out in his own way. But clearly, I think if you are serious in terms of resolving this problem diplomatically, then the road that Nepalese top leadership seem to be taken does not seem to me to be the most conducive of the means of resolving this problem, one which has been with us for a very, very long time.
Okay, General, this is where I'd like to bring you in. The Professor brought up the China angle. We'll talk about that, and also the strategic importance of the three contested areas and why they are so heavily contested.
You see, when we look at the particular pass, the Lipulekh Pass, this is the tri-junction. Now, here, this is the point where three countries meet, and any point which is a tri-junction has its own strategic importance and relevance. Now, if you're actually situated on the Lipulekh Pass, where we have our military presence, there are posters there, you can observe and dominate that area. So anything coming in, and this is that area where there's an axis which comes in. And it is through this pass actually that you will go to Mansarovar, where the road is being constructed. Now, there's another aspect to this is that when Doklam took place in 2017, I think 2017, yeah. So when the Doklam crisis took place, and it lasted for many, many days, one of these the Chinese ministers, he made that statement. He says, okay, you're talking so much about Doklam. What happens if we do it in Lipulekh Pass? Now, the Chinese have always had their eyes here, right? And they wanted to create a dispute. Now, the funny part of it was that actually, while the problem may have been there earlier as to, the western boundary of, as correctly said by Mr. Sood, that the western boundary was the Mahakali River of Nepal, the origins. Now, when we are looking at the particular fact of the origins, etc., the issue, was revived by Mr. Gautam, who was the Deputy Prime Minister of Nepal in 1997, with the Indian Premier, Mr. Gujral. And for no rhyme or reason, Mr. Gujral actually said, okay, we'll discuss it. There was nothing to discuss. And once you say discuss it, then it comes on the table. And then after that, it has remained on the table. I think that was a very serious faux pas on the part of the then Prime Minister to have actually conceded something like this. It was not required. But now having been done, I think there is the problem. You see, China keeps looking at various pressure points. For the earlier pressure point which they put was when you're looking at North Sikkim. Now, North Sikkim is not a place where they should have put, at Nakula. That is not a place where they should have put a pressure point at 15,000 plus feet, right? For anybody who has seen that area, and when you go even further up north to the plateau, that is 20,000 feet. These areas, for anybody who has served there, they are very, very difficult areas. And it is not something which is where you really want to create a flashpoint. Then you come down to at Galwan, at that place where they have again raised a flashpoint. They have raised a flashpoint at the Pangdungso Lake. Now, at various points, I think there is a deliberate attempt on the part of the Chinese to provoke India. While, as I've always maintained, the relationship at the strategic level has always been stable. At the tactical level, there is a deliberate attempt on the part of the Chinese to sort of upgrade it. It stands to logic that over the years, what has happened is that ever since we had the Nathula incident, no shot has been fired in anger. So to that extent, we are all right. But the Chinese will keep provoking. And I think this is a cause of concern because they have their own reasons for doing it. And we can discuss that a bit later as to what those reasons are.
Sure. All right. Taking the discussion forward now, I'm going to go back to a point that the professor was making. Ambassador, we seem to have reached a new low as far as the relationship is concerned. The kind of statements that are coming in from Nepal at the highest level. I mean, the Prime Minister talking about the virus and saying that the virus is being spread by India in Nepal, and this virus is far more deadlier than the one from China and Italy and so on and so forth. Really, I mean, it takes the dialogue to a new low, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with Professor Pant when he says that. But then, we have to understand that India's relationship with Prime Minister Oli has been an extremely frosty relationship. Prime Minister Oli blames us for having damaged his tenure with the blockade. And we have not been able to repair that relationship. However, I think I would like to make it quite clear that in 2015, we shouldn't look necessarily for the China hand everywhere. We have a complicated strategic relationship with China. In 2015, the protest note was also given to the Chinese embassy in Kathmandu, when it was given also to us, because it was there as something that was there in the India-China joint statement. So that's one. Secondly, I think I would disagree with General Katoch on one thing. The boundary issue is something that we inherited. We set up a boundary technical committee to exchange strip maps in 1981. By the end of it, we had done about 97, 98%. Finally, the boundary mechanism was wound up in 2008. By that time, we had about 60 areas of contention left, some extremely small. So I think it is a little incorrect to say that, oh, this was Mr. Gujral, he shouldn't have agreed or whatever it was. The problem doesn't go away if you don't agree to talk. I mean, thereafter in 2000, Prime Minister Vajpayee also agreed with Prime Minister Girija Prasad Koirala that we'll discuss it at the Foreign Secretary level. So I think that by denying a problem, we can't get rid of it. We have a certain special relationship with Nepal, and the best thing to do is not to engage in the kind of rhetoric that Prime Minister Oli has engaged in, which is highly objectionable, as Professor Pant very correctly pointed out.
Okay, all right. So, Professor, considering that the ante has been upped, considering that the rhetoric also is up as far as the relationship is concerned, how do we tread this difficult path now? What should our option be really as far as dealing with Nepal is concerned?
See, there is no doubt when you have a relationship between two countries that are as unequal as India and Nepal are. I think the onus will always be on India, whether India's claims are right or wrong. I think the world will look upon India as the power that needs to do much more, that needs to showcase its benevolence in some ways more profoundly, and that needs to reach out to various stakeholders in this conversation. And so India will have to do much more of this hand-holding as far as this particular problem goes. And we can't get away from this fact because clearly the disparities are so huge. And second, I think a problem that we face with all our smaller neighbors, which I think is par for the course as far as this part of the world is concerned, is that they have become, they use India and China to, as all small powers do when they have two big powers, they use that leverage of one vis-a-vis the other to get their diplomatic agenda forward, to push their diplomatic agenda forward. So clearly China and India will be used in some ways in this game. India will have to be mindful of that reality. As Ambassador Sood said, China may not be there everywhere, but I think the presence, the very fact that China exists in such a big measure in this conversation alludes to the fact that you have in Nepal as in other regional countries in our neighborhood, China's presence, the very fact of China's presence means that they can leverage that to certain effect. And so clearly, when you have you have tensions in other parts of Sino-Indian border, something comes up on the tri-junction area with Nepal, and clearly that will be seen in that context. And so China may not be part of China may not be instigating it, but there is a role that China plays in these conversations, and one needs to be mindful of that as we go forward in engaging with the interlocutors in Nepal. But I think the onus will be on us to make sure that this does not escalate, and I think it's perfectly within our means not to raise the decibel of this debate, not to take this debate in areas where perhaps. Did you lose me? Did you lose me in between?
Yeah, I lost you in between. In between, Professor. Go ahead. You're making a point about how the onus is on India really as far as taking or resolving this issue is concerned. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, by and large, I think it should be our endeavor to make a case to the Nepalese stakeholders that one needs to bring the rhetoric down and to see what can be done in the short to medium term. And as Ambassador Sood pointed out, there is a reality with Mr. Oli that we face, historical and more contemporary, that we can't get away with. And perhaps one needs to bridge that gap. And to be fair, India has done its bit in the last few years. If you see Mr. Modi's outreach to Mr. Oli, it has been quite substantive. It has been in some ways, one hopes that, at the top leadership, there can be an exchange, or that there can be a dialogue which can take this conversation to a more productive level rather than the level which we are witnessing today.
Okay, all right. Yes, Ambassador, you wanted to make a point.
I just wanted to say that we knew in November, because in November when we issued our new maps, as I mentioned to you about reorganization of the state of Jammu and Kashmir into union territories and so on, at that time also Nepal had objected to these maps in terms of taking it up. Now, subsequently, twice they have suggested foreign secretary level talks to talk about it. And I think we should have been, as Professor Pant said, being the larger country, we have to be sensitive, because the smaller countries are always much more touchy about sovereignty related issues, for obvious reasons, because they are the smaller country. And I think that we should have found a way of engaging, I mean, at the foreign secretary level, to kind of not allow things to come to a stage where, let's say, the Nepali cabinet approves new maps. Because as I mentioned, you see, what has now happened is that the dispute which was earlier revolving around Kalapani has now been expanded to take into account the extra 335 square kilometers of moving towards Limpiyadhura, which is just adds more complications to it. And this is something which should have been best avoided rather than through rhetoric. I mean, we had, as I said, we had built the road. Maybe we didn't need to inaugurate it without having first talked to the Chinese. I would say that perhaps General Naravne needn't have said, oh, they must be doing it at somebody else's behest, because that, in a sense, is a slightly humiliating kind of a statement to make for the Nepalese, as if, you know, they are being made use of by China. So I think we need to display certainly a greater sensitivity as to how things that we say are going to be interpreted by the smaller country.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Indeed, it is good to, look at this issue diplomatically and see and have some level of sensitivity, General. But, a neighboring country cannot keep needling us the way that it has in the recent past.
Frank, we've got such lovely, excellent relations with Nepal. This is the only time where we have what they call the most important relationship, the Beti and Roti relationship. It transcends every other relationship. We have got their soldiers serving in the Indian Army in the Gurkha Regiment. Right. Now, I don't agree with the ambassador at all on this, Mr. Sood. No. I mean, are we trying to imply that we are the people who have ratcheted it up? Are you taking the onus to say that India has done everything? Here, the case has been ratcheted up. Mr. Oli, who's a hardcore communist, he has got his own stakes in that game. Now, for his mistake, we are trying to blame the Indian government, the Indian parliament, the Indian external service. What have we done wrong? I think every time when something goes wrong, we tend to cut our own throats. We are, in that sense, our worst enemies. And I think we need to get away from those attitudes. Now, listen. Fair is fair.
Would you like to?
Let him complete. I'll come back to you. Let him complete. Let him make his point. Go ahead, General. The floor is yours.
You can speak. I've got no problems. Here, what you've got to do is let the secretary speak. Let them. All that will take place. Nobody's stopping that. The conversation can go on. The conversations have gone on with the Chinese for more than 50 years. They can go on for more than 50 years here also. That is not a problem at issue. But when the head of a government and when there's an entire cabinet, they start making such outrageous speeches. And now I'm afraid we have come to the situation, regardless of what India does diplomatically or politically, the rhetoric has been set to such a high pitch, Nepal cannot climb down. Their parliament has passed a resolution. There is no way any subsequent government in Nepal can climb down. Let us put the blame very squarely where they belong. They shouldn't have taken it up to that level. Let us stop blaming the Indian Army chief. Let us stop blaming the road inauguration. Right? These are self-defeating attitudes. This is my view. Mr. Sood has certainly got a right to say that, no, we are wrong. We should bow down. That's okay. I've got no problem with that. But I will not accept it. I do not think it is right.
Okay. Taking the discussion forward now, as far as the relationship between India and Nepal are concerned, I'm going to get closing concluding remarks from all my guests. What is the best way forward? Starting first with you, Professor.
I think, clearly you have to start the dialogue process because whether it is at the foreign secretary level or at any other level. But I think whatever level we need to engage with the Nepalese government, we need to start that. But I think, there is a certain acknowledgement that needs also to come from Kathmandu about India's red lines, that India also has certain concerns and Indian interests also need to be protected. And it cannot be that you have a situation where leadership from the topmost leader in the country, in Nepal, can go on making such statements and not have India respond in a certain way. So clearly, I think with both of these will have to be managed and conveyed to the Nepalese. But I think the larger issue remains that with a country like Nepal, where we have seen big and great amount of geopolitical jostling, with China coming in a big way, with some of the domestic political leadership and domestic political context being shaped in a manner that does not help India's cause. I think India will have to inevitably be more proactive in sort of shaping not only the discourse in some of these countries, but also what can be done to better engage various stakeholders. And I think in particular, I would like to point out that I've seen over the last few decades a distinct shift. The younger Nepalese population is becoming more and more anti-Indian, and that's not good for the future of this relationship. I think we need to engage with young Nepalese more. We need to engage with this various stakeholders more. They can be economic, not only political, but various other stakeholders, cultural and economic. But I think this needs to be a broader conversation, which takes us beyond the immediate problem of the border.
Okay, all right. Ambassador, looking ahead now and looking forward, let's forget about the past. Really, as far as the road ahead is concerned, what is it that we need to do? Where do we start?
Well, as I think the first thing, as I said earlier, the first thing is to lower the temperature. Both sides have to put an end to this rhetoric. And I certainly agree with General Katoch when he says that the statements coming out of Nepal, the action that they took of adopting a new map and issuing it within 2 to 3 days of this domestically, was something which was completely unnecessary, because that is what ups the ante. My point in referring to the fact of the inauguration is merely because I don't think the inauguration does very much. The road is there. We are using the road. Nobody is taking the road away from us. So if we know in advance that this is a sensitive issue, then let us respect that sensitivity. And I think we need to, if we have to manage things through dialogue, then we need to be sensitive to each other's concerns. If we are sensitive, if we expect Nepal to be sensitive to our concerns, that Lipulekh is strategically vital for us, and we know that this is an area which has been the subject of discussion, then I think we should be sensitive to Nepal's sovereignty-related concerns in terms of not making this a subject of which acts as a football in domestic politics.
Right.
Because then that is what happens, and that is what leads to the anti-Indian sentiment, which Professor Pant referred to, which has unfortunately been growing in recent years. Now, we can say that Mr. Oli is a communist and so on, but I can tell you I have interacted with Mr. Oli in the past. And he may be a communist, but then there are so many other communist leaders. We have dealt with kings in Nepal, many of whom have not been particularly friendly towards us. So we have had this kind of a complicated relationship. Neighboring countries always have complicated relationships, particularly when there are such large differences in terms of economic and geographical size. So we need to lower the temperature, and we need to start a dialogue so that we can take a step back. And it is going to be more difficult now because there is a new map that is in existence, which has been approved by the Nepali parliament. So I think that will require a little more hard work than had we not let things come to this pass. That's all.
Okay, and General, close the show for us with your quick concluding remark. I've got limited time on the program.
I'll be very quick. I think the most important thing is really to build on the people-to-people relationship. That is our strength. Right? And there is a very large civil society groups in both sides. I think one of the weaknesses of the Indian state, and this has been their right since independence, is our ability to influence people. What we call shaping perceptions. We have been very weak in this particular aspect, whether it is for the domestic audience or whether it is for public for public diplomacy. Now, I think the most important thing is to actually get onto Pakistan, with your think tanks, look into those areas, and try and tell the Nepalese people, we are your closest friends. They cannot get anything better than us, and we need to develop that relationship because we are, regardless of what they can have a relationship with any other country, we are blood brothers. We are together. We are bonded by cultural, not just by family and cultural ties. We are one family, and we cannot let anybody divide us. And I think if that message goes strong in civil society, in my personal view, that would be the best way forward.
Okay, all right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.